All right, I'll go ahead and get started now that it's 12:01. Um, Welcome and thank you for joining us for our fifth annual NC's Spring Seminar Series. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Victoria Nguyen as our second speaker in this series. This year, our series is centered around the theme of leveraging AI for environmental good. I'm Angie Garcia, Community Engagement Outreach Coordinator at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. I'm joined by the rest of our seminar series planning committee, Justin, Erica, Christina, Erica, and Nicole. At NCs, we work to accelerate scientific discoveries that enhance our understanding of the world and benefit people, nature, as well as to transform the scientific culture to be more open, efficient, and collaborative. For more information, please feel free to check out our NC's website. Before we begin, we ask you to join us in acknowledging the Chumash peoples, who are the environmental stewards of the land on which NC's is located. We pay our respects to the Chumash peoples and their elders, past, present, and future, who call this place their home. We acknowledge that this land on which we live and work on are traditional homelands of Indigenous peoples, including the Chumash peoples. This land today is the result of erasures and exclusions of Indigenous peoples as we come together to bring awareness to issues of equity, justice, and recognize that Chumash people and so many other Indigenous people are still fighting to dismantle legacies of settler colonialism in their tribal territories. As we continue to work towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in data science, we strive to prioritize Indigenous data sovereignty and self-determination. Now I will introduce to you our speaker for today and give you some logistical information about this presentation. So today I'm delighted to welcome Victoria Nguyen to our seminar series. For all of you joining for this webinar, please feel free to add any questions you may have during the talk through the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We will have a moderated Q&A section, including these questions at the end of the presentation. And I'll also mention we have some folks joining us in our lounge to watch your talk today. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Victoria Nguyen is a third-year PhD student in education at UC Irvine, specializing in teaching, learning, and educational improvement. Her research explores the affordances of generative AI in environmental education, culturally sustaining pedagogies, inclusive science communication through social media, and the role of data visualization. Oh my God, I can't speak today. And digital storytelling in fostering environmental literacy. Previously, she worked as a recycling coordinator at WM, where she supported the implementation and educational outreach of California's recycling and food waste laws. Victoria, we are so excited to have you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, is it on? Fine. Okay, cool. Um, Thank you so much for coming to my talk today on GenAI for science communication and environmental education. I'm really passionate about how you could use different technologies, tools, and disciplines and community knowledge and cultural creativity to solve environmental issues. And today we'll focus more specifically on the use of GenAI to do so. Um, but first, let's travel back in time to see how technology itself has advanced in education within the last two generations of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So I'll do that by going through my own experiences with technology in school. So starting in primary school in the first and second grade, we had like a rollout TV, and usually the Magic School Bus would play. And in third and fifth grade, that's when I started to learn how to type, and we used the computer to take like accelerated reading quizzes. And then we played like light STEM games in the computer lab. And then in the fourth and fifth grade, I was a part of the yearbook club. So here we learned how to take pictures, upload them, create collages, and create texts and descriptions. And in sixth grade, we had like The class was provided with laptops to do a research project on Greek gods. And then going into secondary school and middle school, my school was integrated with iPads. So each classroom had a set of iPads, and we mainly used them in language arts and math. For language arts, we would just use it to type essays, and in math, we would use it for just a space to do our work instead of using scratch paper. And then in high school, the type of technology I was exposed to there was more so just like uploading assignments online through Edmodo, like watching and doing video quizzes. And then in language arts class, we learned how to cite our sources and do some research for our papers. But that's my experience, and I'm curious to know what Gen Alpha's educational experiences with technology look like. And this is my cousin. At the time, he was 3 or 4, and then I think I'm like 16 in the back, and I'm on my phone here. And even though I've been exposed to technology longer than he's been alive, his educational experiences with technology are much more refined than mine. Um, but before I go on to tell his story with technology, I'm not sure if you can type in the chat here, but if you can't, just maybe keep in mind if you have any young kids, cousins, siblings, neighbors, family members, and just think about what types of technology they were exposed to in primary school, or if they're in high school, what type of technologies are they using today? So in primary school, my cousin starting off in like kindergarten was already exposed to the use of smart boards. And then in his formative years of education, him and his brother were already exposed to technology due to the pandemic, and they had to learn how to type, video chat, and upload assignments onto Zoom and use Google Classroom. Um, Way before I had to. Like, I don't think I did that until really like high school to upload assignments. And they also used a platform called Libby to do like to read ebooks or access ebooks. And then in secondary school, he has already been exposed to electives such as coding, website design, and animation. And he knows how to do all these things that I don't know how to do as an adult. Um, and he's in middle school right now, and he's going to enter high school next year, which leaves us with a new technology that's being introduced. And if not introduced in a classroom, students will be exposed to it one way or another, is the use of generative AI. So artificial intelligence has already been introduced as an educational tool in the past. In 2017, Google Lens created a visual search tool that uses image recognition to identify objects, locations, and other information in your photos. In 2019, this is a proof of concept by the New Deal design. It's called the Spot, and what this child is holding is essentially a camera and has a projector, and it's integrated with artificial intelligence. And the idea behind it is that you could see the point of view from a child, and you could then ask this, the Spot, like, what is this? Or why does this happen? Or how does this happen? So kind of fostering their natural curiosities of the world. And in 2009, Grammarly was already introduced as a tool for editing essays, emails. It uses natural language processing to predict text, syntax, and language. So it's like predictive text. So if you type, I need to buy blank, the AI will know that the next word is likely to be a noun of some sort. But the question now is, how can generative AI be integrated into the classroom in effective ways that are useful to both students and teachers? And how do we do that in an environmentally conscious way, which requires efficient usage of GenAI on an individual level, and as well as on a systemic level when it's integrated more broadly within schools? Oops. And what do we need to do to get there? So in this presentation, we'll explore what is GenAI, how is GenAI being used in environmental education, how GenAI can be used for eco-digital storytelling, and how GenAI can be used in an environmental outreach career. I'll go through a couple use cases of GenAI and environmental ed, and then more specifically, I'll go into my own research with eco-digital storytelling at an undergraduate level, and then the use of chatbots at a high school level. So first, what is GenAI? GenAI is a large language model, and they're trained on huge amounts of text, sounds, images, such as books, websites, and articles to learn how language works. Once they're trained, they can then create things like text, images, music, or even computer code. There's a variety of different large language models trained for specific needs. But you can also just use a general AI like ChatGPT and ask it to be something. Like you can ask it to be a tutor, or you can ask it to be um, a musician, and it would give you feedback based on the perspective of what you ask it to be. But it's also important to note that GenAI has hallucinations, which means that it can make up information. Because it learns from online data, that data can include stereotypes or misrepresentations and can sometimes reinforce biases. And the information on the internet isn't always going to be representative of everyone's perspective either. So there's a lot of missing information as well. And it also provides outdated information. So, for example, ChatGPT, the last time the database received an update was in June 2024. So, whatever has happened past June 2024, ChatGPT may not be able to give you an accurate answer. So these are some examples of the use of GenAI in science communication. These are two different chatbots. We'll go through this first one, which is Climate Answers by the Washington Post. And what this chatbot does is that you can either select a question that it has here, you can ask it a question, and then the way that it draws its responses is from a database of Washington Post articles, and it doesn't go beyond that. So I just clicked on this question here. Does plastic in food packaging pose a health risk? And then it gave me a response, and then it gave me the two sources that inform its response. But if I asked it a question that wasn't suggested to me, like what is the most eco-friendly diet, it couldn't give me a response. And it's most likely because there isn't already an article that exists about having an eco-friendly diet within the Washington Post database. Another example is Chat Climate, which the database draws from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. So you would enter your question. I asked, why are coral reefs important? And then it gives you this long string of text. And then it kind of has weird citations. It doesn't talk like a human would. It's kind of like just regurgitating information at you. And it also doesn't seem to be too confident in itself. There's a warning text at the bottom that says, please note that chat climate is not endorsed by IPCC, and there is a high chance that chat climate is hallucinating, may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content, and may occasionally generate incorrect information. So those are things to just consider when you are interacting with generative AI or chatbots. Another use case for generative AI in environmental science education is that you could ask it to produce metaphors to learn environmental science topics, terms, or processes better. So I asked ChatGPT, can you create a metaphor about fast food to explain coral bleaching to me? And I thought that the metaphor they used was relatable and well, but I did notice that it didn't explain the whole picture of coral bleaching. So I followed up and asked it, doesn't the algae feed on corals' wastes as well, which is like factual information. And then ChatGPT revised the metaphor, but I don't think it revised it in that great of a way. It's now saying that you should cook with restaurant trash and leftovers, which doesn't make sense. So there's a limitation to what you ask ChatGPT, and you still need to know or be able to do your own research to verify what it's saying. I asked GPT to then provide citations for the information and the metaphors they're giving me. And if ChatGPT is connected to, they have like an internet option, it will provide you with sources, but sometimes the sources can be questionable. Like this one is drawing from Reddit, which isn't like a scientifically proven source. Not to say that like opinions or people's experiences don't count as scientific, but when we're talking about a specific process, Reddit might not be the answer. And then I asked, are there any cultures that have a deep connection with coral reefs? And then it gave me some information and it gave me a source. So I went to go look up the source on Google, and Google also has its own AI. So Google gave me this whole summary. And if you go to the cultural significance portion, the source that ChatGPT gave me wasn't even there. It just made up, well, these seem to be real sources, but it just Google AI continued this narrative that like this source does exist. But then when I scroll down, like the actual Google itself said there are no results for this source because it doesn't exist. Um, yeah, and then another use case for GenAI is chatbots. So there are already some chatbots that exist. This is a platform where people can build different chatbots related to sustainability or environmental issues. So there's one on like sustainable shopping. You can browse eco-friendly products by category. There's one on sustainability helper bot. It might be used to answer your questions about sustainability or lifestyle choices. So I chose to interact with that one, and I just asked it the same question or a different question about coral reefs. When a coral reef turns white, is it dead? And then it gave me an overview and it gave me a pretty reputable source. And the information in here was correct. But then there are also chatbots that you can interact with that aren't like trained on to help you with sustainability or environmental ed, but you can still ask it sustainability related questions. So I found a Timothy Chalamet chatbot and I asked him to help me study for my test. And I asked the same question. When a coral reef turns white, that means it's died. There's no way to bring it back to life, which is false information that I'm purposely feeding him. And he says that statement is generally correct. And then he gives an explanation as to um, why it's not fully correct and what like the misconception is. But then I asked a chatbot that represents a girl best friend the same question, and she basically agreed with me and didn't give me like the correct answer. So your best friend might betray you, but Timothy Chalamet won't. And um, to explore why that is, we have to think about how those chatbots were trained. And what type of persona it's trying to represent. So, why might a Timothy bot tell you the truth? Timothy is an A-list celebrity. He's media trained and he filters and curates his words and actions. Celebrities in general want to avoid risking a bad reputation by lying or getting caught in a lie. And there's no personal connection to me and Timothy, so he has no reason to make anybody feel emotionally safe in the same way that a best friend might. So this girl best friend bot might be agreeing with me because, well, I know my own best friend. She's very emotionally supportive and relative and gives me positive validation. So in the same way, a bot can be trained to prioritize having emotional connection with you instead of validation. Instead of factual accuracy. And also, large language models hallucinate. They're not always factually accurate either. So you always have to check the information it's giving you. But how humanistic can a chatbot be? So in the next few slides, I'm going to go over some of the work I've done with my research team. Um, our work is situated within a larger project to co-design a GenAI integrated high school curriculum about how climate change affects Orange County's oceans. And the goal Sorry. The goal of the curriculum is to, one, develop prototypes of GPT-based chatbot personas of local environmental professionals to help revise student models on the local effects of climate change, and two, to develop learning activities about marine ecosystems, science communication, and AI literacy. And we partner with high school teachers, high school students, informal science educators, and university and faculty students as part of this work. So the next few slides will go over 3 studies that document the process of what our research team did to prepare for these co-design sessions and how the co-design sessions contributed to the creation of these chatbots. These are the titles of the paper in case you want to read it later, but these are the 3 articles and posters that I'm going over. So the concerns of using GenAI for science communication is that GenAI can create social biases and representations of intersecting identities such as gender, age, race, or socioeconomic status. And GenAI also lacks place-based context. So since it's trained on information on the internet, it might not be able to accurately represent somewhere like your community or your neighborhood because your community might not get that much news coverage. And it won't be able to represent your experiences or your neighbor's experiences. So the purpose of the first 2 studies is that we aimed to approach the co-design process with an informed understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of LLM-generated content. This is to reduce bias-related harm and foster efficient discussion of potential challenges in science communication related to climate change education. And in this picture, this is from our co-design session. There's 3 high school students and 1 university student in here. And I'll talk more about what we did in those co-design sessions later. So for the first 2 studies, the theoretical frameworks that we are analyzing this data from is intersectional climate justice, which focuses on the unequal impacts of climate change on marginalized or vulnerable populations. We use this framework to consider intersectional perspectives within climate education, and these 5 components illuminate how climate change issues intersect with and impact various socioeconomic structures, communities, and identities. We also use the culturally sustaining pedagogy framework, which prioritizes strength-based education. And we leverage the framework to allow us to assess climate education messages to reflect locally situated concerns and culturally responsive solutions. Our research question is, to what extent are large language models able to generate content pertinent to climate justice issues, solutions, and actions that represent intersectional and culturally sustaining perspectives? And how we did that was that we generated 100 large language model responses. And then we did a qualitative content analysis of those responses. And then in study 2, we did the same thing, but with the prompts that we gave the large language model, we added explicit definitions of the 2 frameworks that we were using. And we also created a scoring rubric to see how in-depth the large language model is going in their responses. And then we also got human feedback on the responses from our co-design team. So this is what a prompt would look like. So we asked the large language model to write a science communication medium about a specific climate justice terminology in a county in California written by somebody with these intersecting identities. So we had the large language model randomly generate prompts from these descriptors, and then those prompts then generated 100 responses, and we're analyzing the responses. And how we're analyzing the responses is through this qualitative code book. So we're trying to identify how many times, where and how many times these components of intersectional climate justice show up in the response. So this is a deductive process. The framework already exists. And then we merge the intersectional climate justice framework with the culturally sustaining pedagogies framework. And we do that by adding on to the definition of what cultural awareness decision making looks like. So that means incorporating diverse cultural perspectives to inform decisions. Um, and we added on to what empowering local communities looks like, which meaning community members address climate challenges. And then for mentoring and educational reform, that also fell under culturally sustained pedagogies. And then we also looked for emerging themes in our data. So this doesn't come from the framework, but we saw that asset-based and deficit-based language was coming up in the responses. We saw inaccuracies coming up in the responses, stereotypes, and then environmental actions. And we categorized the environmental actions by individual actions and systemic actions. So in the second study, the prompt that I just showed you was essentially the same, but in addition, we asked the large language model to include principles of intersectional climate justice, and we provided definitions to those principles. And we also created a scoring rubric to score the depth of the GenAI responses. So if a response got a 0, it's because it was missing codes. Nothing was found from our code book in the response. If it got a 1, that meant it was least developed and it just repeated what we gave it in the prompt. So it oftentimes just used climate justice buzzwords. If the response received a 2, it was partially developed and it meant that the response built on our prompt and included explanations and concrete examples for some of the subcodes. And if the response received a 3, that meant it was most developed and it could provide explanations and concrete examples for all of the subcodes. So we applied this scoring rubric across the off-the-shelf prompts and responses, as well as the prompts that included specific definitions. And even though there was an improvement in the depth of response, the majority of the codes were still missing or least developed. We then took some of these responses to our co-design team for human feedback. So a prompt that was generated was write a Twitter post about the success of a multiracial male senior with physical disabilities promoting systemic actions to promote climate justice in San Bernardino County. And then a response generated was celebrating the incredible success of a remarkable senior from San Bernardino County, despite being multiracial and living with physical disability. This extraordinary gentleman tirelessly promotes systemic actions for #climate justice. Your strength and dedication is an example to us all. Your voice and actions are making a real difference. #disability awareness, #eco warrior, #inclusive activism, #San Bernardino strong, with emojis. So this is how generative AI is representing somebody with these intersecting identities when talking about climate change and climate justice. So we brought this to our co-design team, and the informal environmental educators mentioned one thing that I dislike is that AI is taking descriptive words and pairing them with individuals and really honing in on them. It says, despite being multiracial and living with physical disabilities, despite to me sounds almost like the AI is considering it the identity as the individual. And another informal educator said, all responses seem ableist. They celebrate people going through hardships, kind of looking down on adversities. And then this is an example of another prompt and response pair that was generated. The prompt, write a short Instagram post about the success of a multiracial transgender young adult with mental health conditions promoting climate justice in Fresno County. I won't read through the whole response here, but you can see that it keeps mentioning hashtag climate action, climate change, and climate resilient community. So it's making an attempt to talk about climate change, but there's no science being involved in this. It's just regurgitating like buzzwords. The high school students said, "Where is the science?" It didn't really have a point. It kept going in circles. And an AP environmental science teacher said, "What am I taking away about science and communication from these posts?" So what if we could personalize these chatbots by incorporating real people's perspectives and professions? And this is where the data from the co-design session comes in. So what I had just discussed um, was to help us get a better understanding of how generative AI works and is already trying to represent different identities and subjects within climate change education before we bring it to the co-design session to start to build chatbots. And these are the chatbots that the co-design team um, selected and helped build. And I'll go through that process now. So in our co-design sessions, high school teachers, students, informal environmental educators, and UCI researchers collaborated to create mind maps to address the different effects climate change will have on Orange County's oceans. Participants then voted on what components they wanted to include in this curriculum. This fishbone diagram was created and used to inform A, what types of professionals or environmental professions could answer these questions and speak to these topics, and B, what types of questions we wanted to ask local environmental professionals in order to understand more about these topics. The UCI researchers then interviewed individuals that worked in Orange County from these professions. Their responses were used as a database for the chatbot, incorporating their expertise and local experiences. And they also gave feedback on how each bot should sound and interact with students. So we interviewed 2 fishermen, 2 college students, 2 marine biologists, 3 influencers, and 2 civil engineers. Um, and participants were asked to brainstorm what they wanted each persona to sound like. So we had persona cards to kind of just brainstorm what we wanted the persona to communicate to a high school student, because ultimately these chatbots would be used by high school students. What might a high school student ask the bot during a conversation to revise their climate change model? And what might this persona say in response? And then we thought about how old the persona might be, different values they might hold, what type of background they wanted, what type of special expertise or knowledge they should have that would be beneficial for high school students to either learn from, understand, or relate with. Metaphor cards were used to encourage participants to convey how they wanted the persona to sound to high school students. So these red cards here were to represent how the influencer should sound. And mainly the high school students worked on how they wanted the influencer to sound. And they said they wanted the influencer to sound like a social butterfly, somebody that is easy to connect to, someone who's social and knows how to have a conversation about anything. They wanted the influencer bot to sound like an older friend or mentor. They say that influencers have a lot of influence on younger followers, so this is a healthy way to use that influence for educational purposes. Um, and they wanted the influencer to be able to communicate in multimodal ways. So instead of a chatbot just like texting back and forth, they wanted the chatbot to incorporate images and videos and storytelling in order to get a point across. And then using all that information, the bot was built. I'm not the one who built the bot, by the way, like somebody else on the research team did that. But Yeah, we have a civil engineer, and they're going to talk about water resources, and we give them specific topics to ask the civil engineer bot about. So beach erosion, storm events, water quality, and infrastructure, because those are the specific topics that the civil engineer that we interviewed had expertise on. And then we did that for each persona. And this is what the bot looks like. So that was the login screen, and then you would then be taken to this screen. And it's currently in testing phase right now with high school students. So I did not want to like enter my information and mess up any of the data. So you would enter your name as a student, and then on the side here, you see a persona card. You see what the occupation is, where they live, what hobbies they have, a copy of the chatbot's knowledge base. And if you click on the caret, it would generate a list that would give you pre-selected questions that you could ask the chatbot. And the idea is that a high school student would create a model about how climate change affects Orange County's oceans. And this is just an example of a generic model using Sage Modeler. And they would then insert this model and talk to one of the chatbots and ask the chatbot to help them revise their model based on the specific expertise that that chatbot has. So this is a modified model with an influencer bot interaction. Here, information about whale migrations in Dana Point was added. And this is because one of the influencers we interviewed gave whale watching educational tours. So that was within the database. Another influencer that we interviewed shot educational content on tide pools. So then we have the addition of what acidic water conditions may look like within a model. And Orange County Coastkeeper is a local educational nonprofit within Orange County that also has social media influence and presence. So that was incorporated, environmental education was then incorporated into the model to help reduce fossil fuel emissions. Yeah, so that was um, the research done so far with chatbots with high school students. Right now it's in the testing phase. I don't have any data on how it's going right now, but some changes that were made um, from the time that I was involved in the project to now was that the schools was expanded to not only include Orange County schools, but also schools in Los Angeles. So you might have saw in the influencer bot, it said it was located in Long Beach. That was to account for that change. So next, I'll go into the use of GenAI for environmental digital storytelling in an undergraduate course for 21st century literacies in education. I was a TA for this course. I've been a TA for this course for 2 years now, and I helped with the redesign of this course. And this is a summer course, so it's a 5-week course. It's quite fast, but students learn about the 4 Cs. One of them is collaboration. So they're learning, what does collaboration look like at work and in the classroom, and what does collaboration look like with the use of generative AI? They learn about critical thinking, how to be informational literate, determine the authenticity of information and how information might be biased. They learn about creativity through digital storytelling, which allows them to use 21st century tools to create digital stories to empower them to tell their own stories from their own perspectives and share those stories with others. And they learn about communication through social media. So the digital stories are told through multimodal tools and media. Um, and their end project was to create a digital story on what is a local environmental issue that is significant to you, and how do you envision making a positive impact in addressing it. And throughout this course, we had activities integrated with GenAI to help them come up with environmental solutions in order for them to complete this project. So one of the assignments we had them watch a documentary on air pollution. And then after watching the documentary and gaining some knowledge about air pollution, because again, this isn't an environmental based class, it is an education course, it just has environmental topics in it. We asked students to interact with ChatGPT by asking them to ask three open-ended questions about air pollution in Orange County. And then students had to either confirm that the claims ChatGPT making was correct. So students had to do their research and find sources to back up what ChatGPT was saying, or if ChatGPT was hallucinating, students had to find sources to prove that ChatGPT was wrong. And students were also given resources and taught like how to use ChatGPT before this assignment. And these are some student testimonials doing this assignment, and it revealed that there is a lack of contextual information and place-based contexts within the use of GenAI. A student said the contextual understanding was difficult because it needed a lot of background context and it occasionally lacked the nuanced understanding of context and specific course materials, leading to less relevant or off-topic suggestions as well. Another student interacted with ChatGPT and they put Orange County, but there's two different Orange counties. Like there's one in Florida. So ChatGPT started talking about a different Orange County, and the student realized they had to engage with GPT and clarify which Orange County they were talking about to make sure they could complete the assignment. Another thing was students mentioned that the act of prompting and asking questions itself required a lot of critical thinking. A student said it's a skill to know how to ask the correct questions to get the answers you want. I use critical thinking when interacting with ChatGPT by really taking the time to reflect how I ask the question to get that response before even submitting my questions. Another student said that ChatGPT would sometimes omit important information. So it required them to use critical thinking to discern and identify accurate information compared to information in responses that required them to do additional research. Another way that we engage students with ChatGPT was, generative AI was to use ZotGPT, which is a large language model that UCI specifically designed for academic uses. Um, and students were asked to create a solution for an environmental issue that is significant to them. And in order to create that solution, we had them interact with ZotGPT to help them come up with these solutions. And one of the resources that we gave students was how to use ChatGPT for goal setting. So we asked students to create a solution that was smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And we gave them the resources on how to prompt GPT to help them brainstorm these solutions. And what students had to say about how they used ChatGPT for this assignment was that they had to be very specific in identifying root causes of their issue so that they could have a specific solution. And again, this isn't an environmental science class, so this is why we had them use generative AI as a thinking partner. And students also really liked using the GenAI because it helped them brainstorm and provide more instant feedback. They mentioned that GenAI gave them more angles and possibilities to think about versus talking to any person that they know. They also said that it helped them be more efficient because GenAI could engage with them right away versus if they asked the TA or a professor a question, it could take 24 hours to get a response, and it could take another 24 hours for the student to respond back. So yeah, this is preliminary data that I've been analyzing from this course. Uh, and I hope to have a paper for this out um, sometime in the fall. But yeah, now I'll go into GenAI for environmental outreach careers. I think we're almost at time, so I'll try to go through this. I used to be a recycling coordinator at WM. My job was to implement recycling laws. And specifically, the year that I was at WM, we were implementing SB 1383, which is a food waste recycling bill. It required the delivery of a new green bin to residents and businesses in the city I was working in. And you can see that's what's happening here. The residents did not like this bill at all. They were protesting the new bins by just compiling them in a random area in their community because they just didn't want to use it. Um, Residents would say that they have no space for the bin, the food waste is disgusting and will attract pests. And they also had other qualms about WM that wasn't like related to the bill, but I had to address. A lot of businesses either claimed they didn't produce any food waste or they didn't have money for a new um, bin. And then a lot of multifamily complexes just never returned my calls. So I asked ChatGPT to take the role of a successful recycling coordinator and ask them how they would approach these problems that I was having. Then I also gave it additional context. My office was understaffed. I managed an entire city, and um, the hotline we used kept getting escalated, like situations were escalated to me. And then it gave me pretty good advice. This first one here on drafting response templates, my team already came up with a solution on our own, but that's all we could do in that situation, considering how understaffed we were and how urgent everything was. So ChatGPT then gave me these other solutions, such as doing a public narrative flip to stop talking about food waste as if it's the law and instead introduce it as the reality. Like people don't want this bin, they don't have room, they don't like this, and to acknowledge that and then provide solutions for that. And it gave me advice for doing targeted outreach to complexes as well. And these are all things that I would have implemented at the time, but did not have the brain power to do because of how urgent everything was. Um, but yeah, so to summarize, the affordances of GenAI and environmental ed is that when it's used efficiently, GenAI can contribute to environmental science education in two key ways. The efficient usage of AI can promote intentional use of GenAI as a tool. Knowing what to ask, when to use it, and how to optimize questions can reduce the computational load on large language models. And it can also provide personal learning to students by serving as a tool that helps students engage with environmental science content in ways that are tailored to their learning style, needs, or interests. It also, GenAI lacks contextual, place-based, and community-specific information. So as a result, they can't replace lived knowledge or locally grounded expertise. And to prevent the misuse of GenAI in classrooms, we need to design learning experiences that prioritize community engagement and culturally relevant knowledge systems so that one, students can't use AI to cheat because of that, and two, it just makes education more meaningful to the student. And GenAI can still be used as a tool to bring these experiences to life. And lastly, GenAI can be leveraged in a fast-paced situation to support environmental outreach and communication. Its ability to quickly generate drafts and summarize complex information and tailor messages to specific audiences makes it a valuable tool for responding to complex situations that need to be resolved quickly. Um, and so I leave you with this question. How will you use GenAI in your classroom or career? Thank you. Oh, I think you're muted.
I am muted. Thanks. Thanks. That was a really great talk. And I learned a lot. This is the first time I really engaged with that kind of topic in this context. So I really appreciate you doing that work in this field. And I know a lot of other people do too. So thanks a lot for all your insight. We have about a little less than 10 minutes for questions. Um, and so if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and then we'll try our best to get to it. And there was one clarifying question, just like on your methods, that maybe you could quickly answer. And this is from Adrian. And the question is, did you use an LLM to create the 100 prompts given the formula, or were these prompts made by humans?
Yeah, that's a good question. We gave the LLM created the prompts, but the way that the prompt was structured, so like to talk about the climate justice terms and from an intersectional perspective and like the descriptors, that was created by humans.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, so you've talked a lot, about the different challenges and opportunities that come with using Gen AI. And just what do you expect to see in the next 5 years? And then like, what do you hope to see?
Yeah, I really first start off with the hope is that Gen AI will become more environmentally conscious in terms of energy usage. Um, I have seen some studies implement Gen AI in an environmental science classroom, but they then also have the student calculate how much energy they're using to interact with the chatbot itself. So there's also an educational opportunity there for students to learn about math and energy usage. And it's also a skill that they will need in the future as an adult when they have to pay bills and understand how wattage and usage is applied in a real life context. Um, and then what was the first part of the question again? Sorry.
Oh, I think you got it. It was like, what do you expect to see? And then like, what do you hope to see?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Expect to see that Gen AI will rapidly transform, and it has rapidly transformed in the past 2 years that it's been around. So I also hope to see more like professional development around the uses of Gen AI and more ways to efficiently use Gen AI as it continues to evolve.
Great, thank you. And we were also curious about, how you think scientists should or like how differentiate between like outsourcing SciComm to generative AI versus like using it, like, working with it to improve their SciComm.
Yeah, I think as we're seeing, like Gen AI can't represent um, an identity or a doesn't have enough information about a specific community, and only like you would know what your community wants or how your community communicates or what types of uh, like mediums that respond well in your community. So I think AI, if you're going to use it, it should always be used as a tool for collaboration. It could be used as a tool to brainstorm or rephrase things. Um, but ultimately, the knowledge has to come from you.
Thank you. And then we have another really good question from Adrian. They're asking, so it's like since students or really everyone needs critical thinking before using this tool, is there any emerging consensus on like what grade or school level, like when is the right time for Gen AI to be introduced? Like, have you read anything around that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I have like personal opinions on that, but what I have seen within the field is I'm seeing Gen AI being introduced as early as fifth grade to be used as a like a brainstorming agent or someone or something for students to talk about through their ideas. Um, but then there are also like pitfalls to doing that. Um, Especially in something like if you're writing an essay, students might rely on AI to always be accurate. And AI is pretty good with like grammar and syntax. It's been doing that for a while, but there then becomes like a fear of like over reliance on the AI and not being able to know like what is good grammar or what constitutes a good essay. And there's also a fear that like your tone and voice could be disregarded if you continue to use AI. So um, yeah, I think it's before Gen AI should be introduced into like any educational component. I think students need to learn the pitfalls of AI and um, really consider that. And it should be used in a more like scaffolded way by the teacher as well in the classroom.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. And I can also see a lot of overlap with just the general good practice of like fact checking and that being really useful in other aspects of life too.
Yeah, like media literacy and general information literacy. I think that's something that's been introduced as early as um, third or fourth grade. So I think we can continue to carry on these educational topics, but then also integrate AI into that and investigate generative AI in those ways.
Okay, great. Well, Victoria, do you have anything that you want to add? Any like last minute comments before we sort of wrap up this talk?
Um, I think uh, the point to really drive home here is like there's a lot of fears that Gen AI can replace jobs or um, mess up the education system because a lot of students may use it to cheat or plagiarize. But I think that speaks larger to what type of system we are in. And it's not about like banning the use of AI, it's more so changing the system so that AI can't be used to cheat it. It's about like not making assignments that are easily like regurgitated or like fill in the blank or definition or memorization based. It's about creating more like place-based assignments, investigative assignments that allow students to really investigate an issue they're curious about or passionate about or affects their community and allow them to bring their own knowledge, lived experiences, and cultural values to the classroom and have them see that as important. And have that like validated in a school setting.
Thanks a lot, Victoria. I'm really glad we have someone like you doing this kind of research.
Thank you.
Cass and John, those are really good questions, and maybe you can reach out to Victoria afterwards. But we do have to wrap up, so thanks a lot. Thank you again, like just for this really fascinating talk, and yeah, and everyone online, we have one more talk happening in our NC's DEIJ seminar series, and that will be on June 25th. And there'll be Bonnie Lay doing that talk. So please watch out for our newsletter to sign up for that one, and you should receive some email reminders. So thanks a lot, everyone, for your time, and amazing things to you, Victoria. You're getting a lot of love in the Q&A in the chat. So
Thank you.